Nyesom Wike stood in front of a room full of politicians in Port Harcourt and announced on the record, with cameras running, that Governor Siminalayi Fubara called him before leaving the country and will be joining his Rainbow Coalition upon return. That statement was made in a public luncheon on May 31, 2026. As of today, the Rivers State government has not confirmed it. It has not denied it either. And in Rivers State politics, that silence is not neutral. It is a position. The official story, the one packaged by Fubara's allies and circulated widely on social media, is that this is a political reconciliation. Two powerful men who fought publicly, now finding their way back to common ground. But that framing collapses the moment you examine what actually happened in the 11 days before Wike made that statement. What this story actually represents is a documented case of governor succession, a sitting governor being managed out of electoral relevance by the same federal power structure that installed him, using a cross-party instrument designed to look like a grassroots coalition and function as a patronage absorption mechanism. The question this investigation will answer is simple and specific. What was agreed in the late-night meeting between Fubara and President Tinubu on May 20, and what does Wike's phone call claim actually protect? By the time we are done, you will understand why the silence from Government House is not confusion, it is a calculation. When a sitting governor can be extracted from his own re-election race by a phone call and a late-night meeting, the governorship is no longer the office it appears to be. It is a tenancy, and someone else holds the lease. If you are not yet subscribed to NAIJA Unmasked, this is the moment. The figure, who describes himself as having forgiven everybody, also controls 22 of the 23 local government chairmen in Rivers State. That number is in the public record. What it means for Fubara's options and for yours as a citizen of this country is what this video is built to show you. What is coming is the architecture that Fubara's camp is counting on you never seeing laid out in one place. On the night of May 20, 2026, Governor Siminalayi Fubara traveled to Lagos and met with President Bola Tinubu, who was in the city for the APC primaries. The meeting was not announced in advance. It was not scheduled publicly. Within hours of that meeting ending, a signed statement was released in Fubara's name announcing his withdrawal from the APC governorship primary. The governor said he was stepping aside in the interest of peace, stability, and unity. He said Rivers State was bigger than any individual. He said some truths were best borne quietly, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. He said, and this line is the most telling of all, not everything a hunter sees in the forest is spoken of in the marketplace. On the same night, Tonye Cole, the other significant aspirant in Fubara's lane, also withdrew and cited the party's unity as his reason. The surface narrative that power is pushing is that Fubara made a voluntary sacrifice. The buried narrative, traceable through the documented sequence of events, is that the options presented to him that night left no meaningful choice. A source cited in City People described the architecture precisely. Tinubu and Wike presented Fubara with two paths: step down for Kingsley Chinda or face immediate impeachment proceedings the moment he won the primary. The Amaehule-led Amberewola Assembly, which the Supreme Court has affirmed as the legitimate Rivers House of Assembly, had already initiated impeachment proceedings against Fubara 3 times. The mechanism was loaded, the trigger was available. This is where the historical pattern becomes important, and it is not a comparison chosen for drama. In the lead-up to the 2007 elections, sitting PDP governors across multiple states who had fallen out of favor with the Abuja power structure were not removed by force. They were managed out through the language of party loyalty and personal sacrifice. Dignified exits packaged as patriotism, while their structural base was quietly reallocated to designated successors. Fubara's situation is that playbook executed in 2026 with new instruments. The document that fundamentally reframes what happened on May 20 is not from that night. It is from June 2025, a peace accord brokered by Tinubu between Fubara, Wike, Speaker Amaehule, and key lawmakers. The terms of that accord, reported by SBM Intelligence and corroborated by multiple outlets, included Fubara agreeing not to seek re-election in 2027, accepting Wike's political leadership of the state, and conceding to Wike the power to nominate all PDP candidates for local government elections, with no internal opposition permitted. That agreement was signed almost a year before the primaries. Fubara's withdrawal on May 20 was not a sudden decision under pressure on a difficult night. It was the execution, in public, on a signed statement he had already accepted in private. What the trigger event of May 20 activated was not a new arrangement, it was the enforcement of an existing one. The concealment this entire story is built around is a signed political trade dressed up repeatedly in the language of statesmanship and sacrifice. The Rainbow Coalition offer is its final delivery mechanism. In Nigerian political negotiation, the written agreement and the public statement are rarely the same document, and the gap between them is where power is actually exercised. Now let us examine the specific institutional mechanics of how this works, because what is happening in Rivers State is not simply a strong man overpowering a weaker one. It is a legal and constitutional architecture being used with precision. Section 188 of the 1999 Constitution governs the removal of state governors. The process requires the support of 2/3 of the House of Assembly membership. In Rivers State, the Ameule-led assembly, whose legitimacy was settled by the Supreme Court, has activated that mechanism against Fubara 3 times: in October 2023, 5 months into his tenure, in March 2025, when Tinubu declared a 6-month state of emergency and suspended the governor entirely, and again in January 2026, when a 3rd impeachment process was initiated before Tinubu intervened once more. The constitutional provision exists for the protection of democratic governance. In Rivers State, it has been deployed as a behavioral compliance instrument, a sword held permanently over the governor's head, not to succeed, but to produce obedience. The deliberate ambiguity in this arrangement is that Section 188 is a legitimate constitutional tool. No court will find its deployment invalid merely because the political motivation is questionable. That ambiguity is not accidental. It is the mechanism through which federal pressure is applied to a state executive without the legal fingerprints that direct interference would leave. And the actor who benefits most from that ambiguity, who controls the assembly block that activates it, is Wike. Control of the Rivers APC is not in question. During the May 2026 primaries, not one of Fubara's allies was cleared for any ticket, not for governorship, not for National Assembly, not for the House of Assembly. Victor Okojombo, former factional speaker and a key Fubara ally, was excluded. Chioke Ihunwo, former chairman of Wike's own Obiakpo local government area and a Fubara loyalist, was excluded. The APC consensus arrangement produced 32 House of Assembly candidates, every one of them aligned with the Rainbow Coalition, and Fubara's structure did not appear on a single ticket. That is not a primary, that is a managed outcome. The 2027 presidential calculation embedded in this arrangement is what connects Rivers State to Abuja. In 2023, Tinubu underperformed significantly in Rivers State. The PDP and Labour parties split a substantial opposition vote, and the state delivered neither a clean win for the president nor meaningful support. A united Rainbow Coalition, with Wike as its commanding figure and the APC, PDP, Labour and Action Alliance operating under one strategic direction, solves that arithmetic for Tinubu in 2027. Fubara's individual electoral future is not a factor in that equation. It is a cost that was calculated and absorbed. The regional dimension of this story has a specific texture. Fubara's base is Ijaw. The Ijaw nation is not a minority presence in Rivers State. It is a demographic anchor in the creeks and coastal communities that also sit on a significant share of the state's oil infrastructure. After Fubara's withdrawal, Ijaw leaders and youth groups publicly expressed dissatisfaction. That is politically significant, not because sentiment moves votes in isolation, but because any governorship candidate who cannot credibly carry Ijaw majority local governments faces a structural obstacle that no coalition arrangement can fully paper over. Wike understands this, which is precisely why the invitation to Fubara to join the Rainbow Coalition is not purely about reconciliation. It is about converting Fubara's ethnic and grassroots capital into coalition currency. If Fubara joins, he delivers his base. he also surrenders his independence. That is what joining the coalition means, not partnership, but absorption. Meanwhile, Peter Obi and Kwankwaso, whose National Democratic Congress has been floated in some quarters as an alternative platform for Fubara, have said nothing publicly about Rivers State. Their silence reduces Fubara's external leverage considerably. Without a credible national opposition coalition committed to a Rivers gambit, he cannot credibly threaten to rebuild outside the Tinubu-Wike arrangement. Follow the financial architecture of what Wike controls, and the picture becomes even clearer. Local government allocations in Rivers State, one of Nigeria's most revenue-significant states, flow through the state government, but the political structures that determine who holds the 23 LGA chairmanships are in Wike's hands. The June 2025 accord gave him the right to nominate every PDP local government candidate. That is not an electoral arrangement. It is the control of sub-state patronage networks, every contract, appointment, and revenue disbursement mechanism attached to 23 local governments in a state built on oil. There is one name that appears across every major decision point in this story. In the June 2025 accord, in the APC primaries architecture, at the May 31st luncheon, and in the phone call claim. That name is Nyesom Wike. But the more consequential actor, the one whose interventions have structurally protected Wike's position every single time, is President Tinubu. The relationship between them is what we need to examine directly, because it changes what the Rainbow Coalition actually is. A coalition that a governor can only join by surrendering his electoral future is not an offer of partnership. It is an instrument of political absorption. In Nigeria's federal structure, when Abuja and a minister align on a state outcome, the governor's constitutional office becomes a ceremonial position held on sufferance. But here is what almost nobody has connected yet, and it changes the entire picture. What is happening in Rivers State is not a local drama that happens to have national implications. It is a national strategy that has chosen Rivers State as its proving ground. Tinubu has intervened in the Rivers crisis 3 times. October 2023, brokered the first peace, saving Fubara from the first impeachment attempt. March 2025, declared a state of emergency, suspended the governor, appointed a sole administrator, and handed Wike effective political dominance of the state's party structures during the 6-month vacuum. May 31, 2026, the late-night meeting after which Fubara signed his withdrawal. Each intervention produced the same structural output, Fubara's compliance with terms that advanced Wike's position. Tinubu is not a broker in this story, he is the guarantor of the arrangement. The Rainbow Coalition is not Wike's instrument alone, it is the state-level expression of a presidential compact with Rivers State as a managed asset.
Wike himself made this explicit in January 2026. At a thank-you visit to Ahoda West local government, he called on other states to replicate the Rivers Rainbow Coalition model ahead of the 2027 presidential election. He described Rivers as the template, a state that had demonstrated how to mobilize support across party lines in service of the president's renewal. The question is no longer whether Rivers State is being managed. It is whether Rivers is the prototype for how federal power manages inconvenient state-level elections across the federation. The economic stakes attached to this arrangement are specific, not general. Rivers State is Nigeria's most significant oil-producing state. A lame duck governor, one who cannot make autonomous decisions on investment policy, security commitments, or land use without checking with the coalition that protects his survival, is a governor who cannot make credible long-term commitments to oil operators or to host communities. The security dimension is the most unresolved thread in this entire story. The attack on oil facilities in Rivers State in March 2025 was cited as partial justification for Tinubu's declaration of emergency rule. No individual has been prosecuted for those attacks. No investigation report has been made public. The attack that preceded Fubara's suspension remains the most consequential, unresolved security event in this story, and its non-resolution is itself a political instrument because an open investigation creates a permanent vulnerability that can be reactivated the moment compliance fails. Now, the institutional connection this investigation flagged in the power layer, named plainly. The Rainbow Coalition offer to Fubara is a presidential offer delivered through a ministerial intermediary to a governor whose survival has depended on presidential goodwill 3 times in 3 years. When Wike says Fubara called him and will join the coalition, he is not announcing a personal reconciliation. He is announcing the completion of a transaction that Tinubu designed, Wike executed, and Fubara has been navigating the geometry of since June 2025. When the security of oil infrastructure becomes a political variable rather than a law enforcement matter, the state's institutional integrity has been fully captured, and every subsequent political offer is made in the shadow of that capture. Now, let us give the counter-argument every advantage it deserves before we examine what the evidence actually does to it. The strongest case for what Wike has built is this: Nigerian politics is transactional by nature. It has always required coalition construction, patronage management, and the subordination of individual ambition to collective strategic interest. Wike is not an anomaly in that system. He is its most skilled practitioner. He delivered River State for Tinubu in 2023 against his own party's presidential candidate, a fact of extraordinary loyalty that earned him legitimate influence. The Rainbow Coalition he has assembled, crossing PDP, APC, Labour Party, and Action Alliance, is genuinely unprecedented in its cross-party composition. If its effect is to stabilize River State politics and align it with the federal government that controls the derivation formula, that might not be capture. It might simply be what survival looks like in the Nigerian federal system. Fubara, on this reading, tried to fight the federal center and lost. Joining the coalition is the rational response of a man who now understands the landscape. That argument holds at the surface. It collapses at the structural level. A coalition that extracts from a sitting governor the right to determine his successor, nominate every local government candidate in the state, and clear no Fubara ally for any ticket in a primary exercise is not a coalition. It is a patronage hierarchy with coalition branding. The specific terms of the June 2025 accord gave Wike, a minister with no elected office in River State, the power to determine who stands for election in the state at every level below the governorship itself. That is not power sharing. It is the wholesale transfer of River State's political infrastructure to a federal minister authorized by a federal president. The constitutional architecture that permits this in practice, the combination of assembly threat, emergency powers, and federal allocation dependence, is the same architecture Nigerian federalism was designed to prevent.
Now, here is the data point that cuts against this video's own argument, and it needs to be engaged with directly. Fubara's political record in Rivers State since taking office in May 2023 does not show a governor who built a robust independent structure. He entered Government House as Wike's anointed successor. He inherited the machine rather than constructing one. When the break came, his support group, the Simplified Family, was dissolved as part of the reconciliation deal. The analysts who describe Fubara as a poor student of politics in the Laswellian sense, the study of who gets what, when, and how, are not wrong. He had 3 years of incumbency, the resources of one of Nigeria's wealthiest states, and federal allocation dependence as leverage, and he did not convert any of those into an autonomous political structure that could survive the Wike-Tinubu alignment. The legitimate question this raises is, if Fubara could not build independent capacity in 3 years of incumbency, what is the evidence that 11 remaining months would produce a different outcome? That question is real. It does not, however, change the core finding of this analysis. The structural issue is not whether Fubara can resist effectively. It is whether a ministerial office with no electoral mandate in Rivers State has been used repeatedly
and with constitutional and federal tools to extract concessions from an elected governorship? On that question, the evidence is not ambiguous. It is documented, timed, and attributed. The misconception most Nigerians hold about this story is that it is personal, a godfather versus godson feud rooted in betrayal and wounded pride. That framing is accurate at the surface and analytically misleading at the level that matters. The personal conflict is the occasion. The institutional question is whether a ministerial office can function as a superior political authority over an elected governor through the combination of assembly threat, federal emergency powers, and controlled party primaries. If the answer in Rivers State is yes, and the evidence strongly suggests it is, then the constitutional protections attached to state executive authority are more fragile than most Nigerians have been led to believe. Here is the binary this investigation forces you to choose. Either Fubara's withdrawal was a genuine act of statesmanship, and his phone call to Wike confirms that joining the Rainbow Coalition is his own strategic decision made freely, or his withdrawal was the execution of a deal he had no viable option to refuse, and everything described as peace in this story is political submission narrated in the language of sacrifice. Both positions are defensible. Neither is obviously correct. Tell me in the comments which version of this you believe and why. And if this is the level of analysis you believe Nigerians need more of, the like button is how you tell the algorithm that this kind of work has an audience. 3 actors, 3 trajectories, all of them constrained by what has already been documented. Wike's next move has already begun. He will use his public declaration, "Fubara called me, he is coming," as a fait accompli, applying social pressure through further public statements rather than private negotiation. He will announce a formal coalition expansion event and position it as a homecoming. Fubara's camp will be forced to either attend or visibly absent themselves, and either choice communicates something. The public stage management is the pressure mechanism. It does not require Fubara's active participation to work. His silence already does the work. Tinubu will maintain his established posture of studied ambiguity. He will speak in generalities about party unity, allow the Wike arrangement to deliver the structural outcome, and reserve his intervention capacity for the moment the deal shows signs of breaking. He will not publicly instruct Fubara to join the coalition. He does not need to. The May 20 meeting already communicated what needed communicating, and the signed withdrawal statement that followed it confirmed receipt. Fubara, upon returning to Nigeria, faces a geometry that has no comfortable exit. If he joins the Rainbow Coalition, he governs the remainder of his term as Wike's political subordinate, manageable in the short term, but a concession that ends his independent political identity. If he declines and moves to the ADC or the NDC, as some of his supporters urge, he reactivates the conditions that have triggered impeachment proceedings 3 times already, with the added uncertainty that Tinubu may not find a 4th intervention strategically necessary. He has no confirmed national opposition backing, his Ijal base is vocal but structurally contained, his time is measured in months, not years. 3 signals will tell you which version of this story prevails. First, whether Fubara publicly confirms or denies the Rainbow Coalition claim within 2 weeks of returning to Nigeria and the specific language he chooses. Second, whether any of his significant allies appear at a formal coalition event. Third, whether the Amayeule-led assembly issues any new legislative communication after his return. Assembly silence means the deal is holding. Any formal assembly communication means it is not, and the compliance mechanism is being reloaded. The question this investigation opened with was what was actually agreed in that late-night meeting between Fubara and Tinubu on May 20, and what does Wike's phone call claim protect? The answer the evidence builds toward is this: the meeting did not produce a new agreement, it enforced an existing one. The phone call to Wike, if it happened as described, means the decision was not made that night. It was made months earlier, in June 2025, and the phone call was the signal of acceptance. The Government House silence on Wike's public claim is not denial. In Rivers State's political communication architecture, where every significant development travels through unofficial channels before appearing in official ones, silence from the governor's office on a claim of this magnitude is, structurally, confirmation.
If this model holds, if Rivers State delivers a Wike-approved governor under a Tinubu's second term, the specific institutional consequence is permanent. The precedent will be that a sitting governor who asserts independence from the powerful predecessor can be managed back into submission through assembly threats, federal emergency powers, and cross-party coalition mechanics. Every future Rivers governor will govern in the shadow of that precedent, and every future Nigerian governor who considers asserting independence against a more powerful patron will have one clear case study available, and that case study will not encourage independence. Wike said from that luncheon stage that the governorship race in Rivers is gone. He said the Rainbow Coalition will be in power for 8 years. He said this to Fubara's own allies, in public, in Port Harcourt. He was not challenged. That is not a rhetorical boast. It is a structural declaration, and the most important unanswered question in Nigerian federalism today is the one this investigation can document but cannot resolve. In a constitutional democracy, when can a minister announce from a luncheon stage that a state election is already decided, name an 8-year timeline, and face no institutional consequence for that announcement? Sit with that. You now hold information that most Nigerians watching the evening news tonight do not have. The story they are seeing is two political rivals finding common ground. What you now know is that the ground was prepared in June 2025, transferred in a late-night Lagos meeting and announced from a Port Harcourt luncheon stage, with a phone call as the only evidence of consent and Government House silence as the only response. There is someone in your circle making sense of what is happening in Rivers State without that full picture. Get this video to them, not because this channel is asking, but because that person is drawing conclusions about Nigerian democracy based on the official narrative, and what gets decided in Rivers State in the next 11 months will tell us more about how federal power actually functions in this country than almost anything else on the political calendar. The thread this investigation has not yet fully pulled is the one that connects the March 2025 oil infrastructure attacks, the ones that triggered the emergency rule, the ones that have never been prosecuted, the ones whose perpetrators have never been named, to the political actors who benefited most from the emergency that followed. The names connected to that question belong in a separate investigation. It is coming. Stay analytical, Nigeria. The mask is still coming off. I will see you in the next one.